Hello and welcome to the presentation Introduction to Orthography, the writing system of language. Orthography includes all aspects of the writing system, such as punctuation, typeface, handwriting and spelling. All of these things, their history, contribute to the writing system as it presently is. But in this presentation I'm just going to focus on some basic ideas behind approaching the spelling system of English and the ways that the English letters of the alphabet have been employed to deal with spelling. But before I get into that, I want to tie this presentation to an important idea that was focused on in the phonology presentation, the last presentation. In the presentation on phonology, remember, phonology is the sound system of language. It was noted that an important feature of human language appears to be its dualistic characteristic. Its dualistic characteristic. What's that? Well, that's the possibility it has for making meaning out of a finite set of bits or chunks. Chunks that are ostensibly meaningless unless they're in the presence of other bits or chunks. We saw that phonemes are sounds that can come together to form larger units of sound to form meaningful speech. Well, this duality of structure applies also to written language. Of course, here it's letters that enter into various combinations to form, you guessed it, words, whose different spelling signifies differences in meaning. Recall that the sounds recall these sounds here. So I've put them up in phonetic transcription. Safe and save. A minimal pair separated by the unvoiced versus the voiced labiodental fricative consonant sound. You may recall that this coincided with the spelling of the words safe and serve. Well, unfortunately, the spelling system of English just isn't always quite that regular when it comes to sound-spelling relationship. For example, how would you write this word? Sight. I'll say it again. Sight. I mean, it could be any of those spellings, right? So how did the system end up like this? Is this a really bad thing? It certainly has presented problems to language learners, and it's true that there are other languages that do a much better job with sound spelling standardization. How important is spelling anyway? Does the system also make it difficult for reading? Well, these are tough questions, and I hope this presentation will throw a bit of light on all of this. But first, let's consider a view of English and its spelling system that seems to emphasize its predictability. And it does it in a rather joyful and entertaining way, I think. A climactic moment. Then we saw him pick up all the things that were down. He picked up the cake and the rake and the gown and the milk and the strings and the books and the dish and the fan and the cup and the ship and the fish, and he put them away. And then he said, "That is that." And then he was gone with a tip of his hat. Well, apart from being a wonderful and classic piece of literature, what might it suggest about the spelling system of English? Why don't you pause here and return after a bit. This poem, along with a lot of books created by Dr. Seuss for beginning readers, would seem to suggest that there is a great deal of regularity in the written system. Many of his books capitalise on the language's regularity with spelling patterns. In this extract, for example, he pairs rake with cake, dish with fish. Okay, well, consider this. I never will learn to read English aloud. There's mode, toad and road, and then there's allowed. And once I had finally learned to say move, I meant love, shove and dove. And what did it prove? It proves I'll never discover the coves where the treasure was found, nor the stoves, nor the groves. This is a poem by Jessica Davidson, and it can be found in the reading that goes along with this presentation. What does it suggest might be the problems with English spelling? Well, let's look at the second line. You can see that the two letters OW appear in mode, road and allowed. So the two letters OW represent the O sound in mode and road, but the OW sound in allowed. And you can see a similar problem with love, dove and shove versus prove. And then again with prove with cove, stoves and groves. So these words seem to have the same spelling pattern but with different results in terms of the way we pronounce them. And this isn't all. The two words allowed and allowed sound the same but clearly mean something different and are spelled differently. So all this might suggest that there's just not much correlation between the spelling patterns of English and the way it's pronounced. Well, let's go into it a little bit further. The poem rhymed move with prove, and it turns out that they have a similar spelling pattern. This was contrasted with shove and dove. And this group was also contrasted with cove, stove and grove. And I'm going to use the singular forms for simplicity. Wow, 3 different sets of words with the same spelling patterns, O-V-E. But each set giving us different sounds. So here is the phonemic transcription of those sounds. Well, at least we've been able to group these words. So that might lead us to say there might be some consistency to the spelling system. But what about this? We have words that rhyme with move and prove that don't clearly share the same spelling pattern, groove and you've, and this word, sort of slang, it's short for governor, would have the same sounds as shove and dove but spelt differently. And what about this word? Mauve, the colour, a very different spelling pattern again. Okay, well actually this last example is called a loan word or a borrowed word. That's what linguists refer to as a word that has linguistic features taken from another language. Well, this word has etymological roots in French and Latin, and that explains why it's spelt that way. So you can see that we have words that share some spelling pattern. They have homographic elements, and then there are words that share some similar sound. They have homophonic elements. Oh, I can't resist. We have some words here for your glossary. So clearly we can see that there isn't a clear letter to sound correspondence, but there are nevertheless patterns that can be discerned. So here are some questions for us. What do you think? I mean, perhaps already you can see that this claim is a bit extreme. I mean, obviously there isn't a one letter to one sound correspondence as we might get with the International Phonetic Alphabet. Actually, no naturally occurring alphabetic system ever is that consistent. And, you know, there clearly is some patterning involved. The question is, though, how much patterning? Because that would lead us to know whether or not this is a good question. reforming English spelling so that words could be spelled the way they sound would be a good idea. Well, is there more to a spelling system than its consistency with sound symbol correlation? Perhaps the spelling system is more than a matter of phonetics. Well, before we get into that, what about this statement? Do you think this is true? So I suppose that what we're asking here is whether the English spelling system is really like a camel. That is. Okay, have a think about this before you come back. But what does it mean to say most words are spelled the way they sound? This doesn't mean we can safely say that there is a one-to-one correspondence of sound to symbol. One sound, one symbol. Because, there's still correspondence when two letters represent one sound. That's a form of correspondence. And there's a name for this. When two letters represent a single sound, the combination is called a digraph. And this is a very important part of the English writing system because there are far more phonemes in speech than there are letters of the alphabet. So the system uses digraphs. And here are some consonant digraphs. They include the sh sound in ship, represented by the letters S and H, and the F sound f in trough, represented by the letters G and H, and the nasal ng sound in sing, represented by the letters N and G. Vowel digraphs include EA for the E sound in bread, and OA for the diphthong sound in boat. And actually there's also a discontinuous digraph, which is very important in the system, which is used to mark long vowels and diphthongs, as in not rat and con, but rate and cone. But we only say rate and cone because of the E. That's called a discontinuous digraph because the AE and the OE are not together, so hence discontinuous. And sometimes this is known as the magic E because it changes a short vowel sound to a long one. And there are thousands of words that are affected by the magic E rule. Finally, though more rare perhaps, are three letters represented by a single sound. So obviously that's called a trigraph. And here are some examples. The ch sound in watch, represented by three letters TCH, and the O sound in chateau, represented by EAU. Chateau, of course, is another example of a loan or borrowed word from the French. All right, listen to this word. Feep. I'll say it again. Feep. Feep. That's right. Okay, well this word is made up. This word is made up, and it's kind of an experiment that I want to do. I want to try and replicate what it feels like to be a speller. And first of all, see if you can repeat it. Okay, obviously I can't hear you, but I've no doubt you had no trouble replicating the pronunciation of this word pretty accurately. Well, now I want you to list as many ways as possible for spelling it. Here are some possibilities. Study these for a second. What does this tell us about the spelling system? I mean, perhaps it tells us that we can draw upon our experience with English spelling, and that will help us come up with some potential candidates that seem reasonable possibilities. Draw upon our experience with the English spelling system. If we were less competent with the language, we might come up with these. Close, right? But none of them work for FEEP. Do you agree? You know, as teachers, we should always be on the lookout for what the errors are telling us about what the language user is acting with. For one thing, what's encouraging about these examples is that they all follow a consonant-vowel-consonant pattern, if we take the second one as utilising the magic E rule. And the V in the last word, well, it's a V and not an F. At least it's a labiodental fricative, so, you know, somewhat close to the unvoiced version, the F sound. But what about the second word? It just doesn't look right, does it? Like the second word in these two made-up samples here, which I'm not going to pronounce, some letter combinations just aren't permissible in English. Glark seems okay. We can pronounce it. It seems okay. It doesn't exist, but it seems okay. But I wouldn't know how to pronounce the second one. So just think about the problem of reading some of our loan words originating in another language. Well, linguists, as always, have a special term for the knowledge of the special sequence of letters that are permissible for a particular language. And this is the word graphotactics, another word for your glossary, no doubt. So let's reflect on this. Hearing a word is one thing, but spelling a word is a more demanding task. It requires a sense of the graphotactics of the language, and a lot can go wrong. So we might want to recognise that though reading English can be difficult enough, the task facing a speller might be even harder. So back to the question. There is some regularity in English spelling. Is there enough to say that most words are spelled the way they sound? So let's get some facts straight. There are 26 letters of the alphabet. There are about 40 phonemes in RP English. The spelling system gains some regulation by utilising digraphs, trigraphs and the magic E. This accounts for a lot of words. On the other hand, there are homophonic and homographic aspects to make things a little more challenging. Nevertheless, there are spelling patterns, as the analysis I did of the homophonic and homographic word sets inspired by the Jessica Davidson poem showed us. And where there are patterns, there are rules, right? And where there are rules, there is the possibility of regularity. Well, when we consider the regularity or irregularity of English spelling, we have to ask, what words are we going to count? This is important because irregularity will rise if we include things like proper names of people and places and rare foreign loan words. On the other hand, regularity will rise, not irregularity. Regularity will rise if we include, and this may seem a bit of a surprise, but lengthy technical terms. Because long as they are technical terms, especially terms coming out of science, have a very logical and predictable spelling pattern usually. And this may surprise you then. It turns out that there seems to be less than 500 words in English whose spelling is wholly irregular. These would be the no-hopers that you just have to learn. And by the way, this is all according to studies referenced in the Cambridge Encyclopedia of the English Language, and this is going to be on your bibliography. So, how strong are the spelling rules of English? So here are some statistics also taken from the Cambridge Encyclopedia. According to one source, it's been estimated that only about 3% of everyday English words, these are the everyday English words, are so irregular that they would have to be learned completely by heart. And over 80% are spelled according to regular patterns. So that leaves some 15% where the status of regularity is arguable. So all is well then after all. Well, no, because a great deal of confusion is caused by that 3 to 15%, and it's the commonly used words that unfortunately tend to be unphonetic. So the answer isn't black or white, but it's not as extreme a situation as some spelling reformers claim it is. But there clearly is a problem. So what should we do? Well, one response is to promote memorization of letter sequences. For some words, this makes perfect sense because some common words like are, some and one retain their original spellings, even though their pronunciations have changed considerably over the centuries. Right? Retain their original spellings, Old English words. These spellings tell a historical story, and that's kind of intriguing. Anyway, more on that in a minute. There's a raft of research, though, that says that the effort of memorizing lists of words in preparation for spelling tests has little to no long-term effect on someone's spelling ability. And I won't say any more about this issue here because it's so well covered in the printed material that goes with this presentation. All right. Well, another response is to teach children rules of spelling patterns. And again, this makes perfect sense if the rules are really good. And that's a pretty good rule. But they're not always good. And here's a once popular but particularly bad one. I can recall being told this rule. And the rule is, I before E except after C. So it works for receive, deceive, conceit, sealing. But what about these words? Ancient, conscience, deficit, efficient, financier, glacier, juicier, nescient, science, society, species, sufficient. And then here are words where a letter other than C is followed by EI, not IE. Okay, so there may be a place for spelling rules, but they've got to be good rules. And again, there's a raft of research suggesting that learning a rule is one thing, but applying it in real situations is quite another. You may do really well on the spelling test, and you may have learnt the rule, but a good rule, let's say. But will you apply it when you need to? In other words, learning a rule is not the same as internalizing a rule. And there's more on this in the readings. So what else can we do? Well, we might first want to take a cool, hard, linguistically informed look at the English spelling system. According to D.W. Cummings, the spelling system of English has evolved in ways that respond to roughly 3 demands. The first one is the most obvious. It's the phonetic demand that we spell words the way they sound. If the spelling system evolved only as a response to this need, then all the books would be filled with words as phonetically predictable as the Dr. Seuss text that I started with. As we've seen though, as it turns out anyway, a lot of words are spelled the way they sound, depending on how you count them, remember. But there are other demands on the evolution of the spelling system besides the phonetic, and that's important. Number 2. In particular, there's this one, the semantic. Or sometimes it's referred to as the analogical. I think you'll see why when I explain it. This is the demand that the spelling of a word should reflect its meaning. So even though we don't need the B at the end of bomb, it's a silent B, the word's connection to a word like bombard is preserved. Now, this one example may sound pretty trivial by itself, but it turns out that we benefit enormously from this phenomena, and it's a lot more prevalent than you might imagine. Spelling, in other words, signals meaning and not just sound. So that's the insight for this second demand. This allows writers to show the connections between words that share meaning. It also makes it easier for reading, though not perhaps at the initial beginning reading stages. But when I hear the word sight, I have to figure out what word is being used. But when I read it on a page, I can see that it is referencing maybe location because it's spelt S-I-T-E, or vision because it's spelt S-I-G-H-T, or calling up some authority and it's spelt C-I-T-E. In other words then, it's the spellings that give me this edge, and if everything was written in IPA, well, we would lose this edge. And finally, Cummings reminds us of the etymological demand on the spelling system. The spelling preserves a history and a place of origin. The spelling evokes the incredible ways in which the language has evolved over time and geographical space. We have lots of loan or borrowed words in the language. There is something very humane about preserving something of their origin, but a phonetic reform of the system would eliminate that possibility. And on this last point, the readings provide lots of ideas for resources to entice young students to take an active interest in the etymology of words. And I think in doing that, that's likely to increase their graphotactic sensitivity. All right. All right. So the question is perhaps, how do we get our students to know and appreciate the English language, the extraordinary, though quirky, English language, the bizarre and extraordinary beast that it is? Well, as this presentation winds to a close, I just want to mention how much I've enjoyed tinkering with the language system in creating presentations like this. As I prepare slides to illustrate linguistic phenomena, I sometimes start playing with the language just for the fun of it, and I get carried away with it, dipping into it to see what connections and patterns it holds. And I don't think I'm weird. Okay, well, maybe I'm a little bit weird, but perhaps this is the key, giving students the space, time and encouragement to forage in the world of language. Of course, they'll benefit from some tools to help with these inquiries, and I hope you will get some ideas for what those tools might be from this course and the readings. All right, well, as always, I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and I will see you next time. Take care.